In the last lesson, we learned how to actually create a server, to create a folder within that server, and then to create a file. We added some PHP to the file and then tested that in the browser to see that it actually worked. Now what I want to do this lesson is to actually connect to phpMyAdmin to create a database and actually populate that with some data. But before I do that, I thought it'd be nice to go into Preferences, go to User and General. And if you recall, we set up the autosave. And one thing that happens is it actually plays a little ding. You might have heard it in the previous video. And I want to switch that off. So in Sounds here, I'm going to slide that slider off and click on Save. So that'll stop that little ding. Okay, so let's move on with the main focus of this lesson, which is to connect to phpMyAdmin. So I'm going to click on my Server tab. And what I want to do, I want to just go back to the root of the server. So in other words, there's no forward slashes and no section 1 and test PHP on the end here. And I'm going to change this URL / and type in phpMyAdmin. Press enter. And here we are at the login screen of phpMyAdmin. Now the default username is root and the password is just blank. Now I know that's not secure, but for the time being, we're going to leave it as that. Click on Go. Now if you've never used phpMyAdmin before, it can actually seem quite daunting. And I could actually produce a whole course just on phpMyAdmin. Now we don't want to go into every single detail in phpMyAdmin. What we want are some quick wins. So in other words, I want to set up a database, I want to populate that database, and I want to start grabbing the data and manipulating and playing around with that data basically as quickly as possible. In later lessons, we will come back to this and we'll go into a little bit more detail of some of the features and what we can actually do with it. So the first thing I want to do is on the left-hand side, we're not going to touch these 3 databases here. What we want to do is to actually click on this tab here, Databases, and we're going to create a database called Company and click on Create. So that database has been created and we can see it on the left-hand side here. Now let's imagine in my company I have some users. So what I want to do is I want to create a user table. So if I click on Company, what I could actually do here is I could actually create a user table, specify the number of columns, click on Go, and then start to populate it with some user data. Now I don't want to do that. What I want to do is I want to go for that quick win, as I said. So I want you to go to a website called generatedata.com. So now that we're in here, the first thing I want to do is to click on and select a country. I'm going to go for United States here. The column name for the first one, well, I want the first name for the first one. The data type will be a name, and the example would be any gender, so male and female. The second one, let's have surname, and again the data type will be a name, and this example would be a surname. I think it'd be nice to have the date of birth, and the date of birth we need to have a date, and the type I'm going to go for a MySQL date time. The from and to dates, let's select something reasonable, so click in the year and let's go back to around about the 1950s or so. Click a date there, and we'll go to the early 90s and click on another date. Now the format of that date is saying the year, the month and the days, which is what we want, but the H, I and S is for hours, minutes and seconds. I want to delete that. So just year, month and day. And in the fourth one is going to be email. Data type will be email. And no examples available, that's fine. Next section, we don't want HTML, we want SQL. And the database table name, I'm going to call it users. The database type, MySQL is correct. Include a create table query. Well, yes, we do want to create a data table. If you recall, in phpMyAdmin, we did not create the table because I said we're going to let this do it for us. Do we want a drop table query? Well, no, we don't, because we'd create a table, then drop it, so we'd get an error. So we don't want that. So the next thing is this add default auto increment column. Now, if you don't know what that is, basically that will allow us to ID every single record as an individual record. So the first column in our table would be an ID column. It would have an auto incrementing number, so starting at 1, then 2, then 3, etc. So yes, we do want to have that. And again, I'll go into more detail about that later. Next thing, how many rows? Well, I want 100 rows, and I want to prompt download and generate. So that's going to generate 100 records for us. It's going to go into my download folder. So that's it done. So now I can go back to phpMyAdmin. I have my company database selected. I click on import. I need to choose the file. So choose the file. It's in my downloads folder. There it is. So double click on that. All of these default settings are all fine. So I can just click on go. And there we are. The import has been successfully finished. Now if I go over here on the left hand side, I can see I've got my company database, and in there I have some users. Click on users, and there we can see the 100 records. So that's it for this lesson. It's a nice, easy way to get some data into that database. So we're getting ready to actually query the database from the front end and actually pull some data and display it in the browser. So just as a quick recap, we can now actually create a database. Within that database, we know that we can actually create a user table or any table and actually populate it with some data. Now, as I said earlier, I will be going back to phpMyAdmin in a little bit more depth, and we'll be manually creating database tables and actually entering some data as well. I think at this stage though, it's important to have that quick win, as I keep calling it, so we can actually get to the front end, connect to the database, pull some records, and actually start to build a little interactive page. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A section, or you can send me a private message. Now at this stage, there could be a few errors creeping in, but if you go back and watch both videos again, just make sure that you're following every single step correctly and you should be good.